This is Metatherapy, where we talk about therapy itself, not advice, not diagnosis, just understanding the process so you can use it better. Each episode of Metatherapy is psychoeducation, not therapy. If something resonates, it's meant to be language you can bring back into your own work. If you've been anywhere near the wellness space in the last few years, you've seen a few things. EEG headbands that monitor your brain waves during meditation, wristbands that vibrate at frequencies designed to calm your nervous system, HRV sensors that show you your heart rhythm, coherence in real time. These are not cheap devices. Some of them are backed by real research. Some of them are being used in clinical settings. And the question that I keep coming to, either through myself or from colleagues or people who reach out via this channel, is, do they actually work? So here's what I want to do today. I'm not going to review the devices the way a tech blogger would, trying each one for 2 weeks and telling you which app has the better UI. I'm going to audit them the way a clinician would, which means I'm going to start with a question that most of these product teams never fully answer. What does nervous system regulation actually require biologically? And does this device help the body get there, or does it make the experience of trying to get there feel better? Those are two different things, and the difference matters. So we're going to use 3 audit criteria for each of the devices we're going to talk about today. So first, here's what the research autonomic regulation actually shows. For the nervous system to genuinely shift from a dysregulated state, high sympathetic activation, threat scanning, contracted, toward a regulated one, 3 things need to happen. First, a signal of safety has to reach the nervous system through the body, mind, the body, something that overrides neuroception, the unconscious threat scanning the autonomic system is doing constantly. That signal can be touch, rhythm, breath, sound, or other things like proprioception. It cannot be a cognitive reframe alone. Second, there needs to be sufficient time in a slower rhythmic pattern for the baroreflex to engage and vagal tone to increase. This is measurable. It's not subjective, and it takes time, a few minutes at minimum, not 30 seconds. And then the third criteria is that some degree of active participation from the person is clinically meaningful, not because passive interventions don't work. Some do, but because one of the therapeutic goals of any regulation practice is building the person's felt sense of their own capacity, that awareness of self. I can do this is itself part of the treatment. A device that regulates for you may produce short-term relief while quietly undermining that longer-term goal. Every device we look at today gets evaluated against those criteria: safety signal, rhythmic time, active participation. So let's go. So polyvagal informed interventions restore access to the ventral vagal complex through bottom-up approaches: breath, rhythm, touch, that stimulate vagal afferents and promote parasympathetic activity. The body's participation is not optional. So before we look at any of these devices, I want to establish something. On Monday of this week, if you caught that episode, we did a 15-minute somatic practice, body scan, coherence breathing at about 5.5 breaths per minute, a felt sense resource anchor, no device, no app, no score, just breath and attention and the body. If you haven't watched that yet, I'd actually ask you to go to that first and come back. Not because this episode won't make sense without it, it will, but because I want you to have a felt sense of the baseline before we evaluate what any of these devices can add to it. The practice is 15 minutes, and it is worth it. Here's what the practice demonstrated, clinically speaking. Resonance frequency breathing at approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute consistently produces measurable increases in heart rate variability. That's not anecdotal. That's documented across multiple randomized controls trials. The baroreflex engages, vagal tone increases, autonomic state shifts. All of it happens without a single piece of technology involved. So when we evaluate a wearable today, the question is not, does this device do something? The question is, what does it add to what the nervous system can already do on its own? And is what it adds worth the cost, whether that be financial, cognitively, or clinically? Coherence breathing at about 5.5 breaths per minute has demonstrated significant reductions in anxiety, depression, and stress across clinical trials. The mechanism is biological, baroreflex stimulation and increased RSA, and it does not require biofeedback technology. But let's see if these devices can actually add some value. Let's look at them. So the first one we're going to talk about is called Muse. Muse is an EEG headband, which means it's basically measuring electrical activity in the brain. 7 sensors, 2 on the forehead, 2 behind the ears, and 3 reference points. The data gets processed through the app and translated into real-time audio feedback. When your brain is in a calmer state, the soundscape in your headphones settle. When it becomes more active, the sounds, wind, weather, depending on what setting you're using, pick up the intensity. The concept is pretty straightforward. Show people their brain state in real time, and you'll help them to learn to reach calmer states more reliably. That's neurofeedback. It's not a new concept. Clinical neurofeedback has been around really since the 1960s. But what Muse did is make it consumer accessible. So Muse has over 200 associated research studies and has been used in clinical trial protocols, including an RCT with traumatized adolescents in residential care and a Mayo Clinic open label pilot with long COVID clients and patients. The long COVID study found significant reductions in stress and anxiety and improvements in cognitive function, with gains correlated to the amount of use of the device itself. And that's meaningful evidence that is based on a consumer device. And I want to acknowledge that. The long COVID study is particularly notable because it's Mayo Clinic, and that's not nothing. And the cognitive improvements held at the 180 follow-up were very impressive. But here's where I want to be honest with you. The long COVID study was open label, no control group. The sample was predominantly white and female, which limits generalization and the ability to kind of go across populations. And the majority of Muse's research base leans towards feasibility and pilot designs rather than large, independent, randomized, controlled trials. But the evidence is promising. It is not settled. It's also worth noting that Muse's research page lists over 200 studies, but a significant portion of them use Muse as a measurement tool for other interventions rather than as the intervention being studied. And that's an important distinction. Using Muse to measure brain states during a study is not the same as studying whether Muse produces better outcomes. When you dig into the research, that distinction matters. Here's the other thing that I think people will miss about Muse, and this is the question I've been asking if I were consulting with a product team. The app rewards calm brain states with positive feedback. Settle the EEG signal, and the audio environment settles with it. That sounds right. But here's the clinical problem. For some clients, particularly those with trauma histories or hypervigilance, calm on EEG does not necessarily mean regulated. It can actually mean suppressed. A person can produce a calm frontal EEG reading by doing exactly the wrong thing, tensing the body, holding the breath, effortfully suppressing anxious thoughts rather than actually allowing the nervous system to settle. The score goes up. The device rewards them. But what they've practiced is not regulation. It's a more sophisticated version of white knuckling. So against our 3 criteria, safety signals, partial. The audio feedback is conditioned, not biological. It can be a safety signal over time, but isn't one inherently. Rhythmic time, yes, if used during the breath practice. And then active participation, yes, for sure. But the incentive structure may reward the wrong kind of effort for some users. So what's the best fit? It's really best for motivated meditators who aren't working with significant trauma or somatic hypervigilance. So verdict, use with care in clinical populations. So the next biotech solution we're going to talk about is Apollo Neuro, which is a different category of device entirely. Where Muse reads the brain and gives you feedback, Apollo doesn't really read anything. It delivers. Specifically, it delivers low frequency vibrotactile stimulation through the skin. You strap it to your wrist or your ankle. You select a mode. There are modes for like sleep and focus, calm, energy. And basically, the device vibrates patterns designed to engage the nervous system through touch. The mechanism: touch-based sensory input activates mechanoreceptors in the skin, which can trigger parasympathetic responses through afferent nerve pathways. The theory is that specific rhythmic vibrations and patterns signal safety to the nervous system, not through cognition and not through breath, but through the skin itself. Apollo was developed by neuroscientists, originally tested with military veterans with PTSD. And that's worth knowing. This isn't a wellness startup that discovered vibration. There's real research lineage here. Apollo's published research includes open-labeled evaluations in nursing staff, a 40% reduction in stress and anxiety in 2 weeks, which is very impressive, a pediatric pilot study in children and adolescents with anxiety and ADHD. And in that study, it was 100% showing mood improvement. 9 out of 10 showing improved engagement, and ongoing IRB-approved studies, including one with MAPS, examining Apollo's use to sustain PTSD remission following MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. The MAPS collaboration is the most rigorous thing in Apollo's pipeline, and it doesn't have published results yet. The open label studies are promising, but I want to be direct with you about what open label means. No control group. Participants know they're receiving an active intervention, and the expectation effect is hard to control for. That doesn't mean the device doesn't work. It means we don't know yet how much of the effect is the vibration and how much is the context of using a device that someone believes will help. Almost all of Apollo's research to date has been conducted or initiated by Apollo Neuro itself or researchers with close ties to the company. That's not unusual for early stage device, but it's worth naming. Independent replication at scale hasn't happened yet. Keep in mind when you're evaluating the research claims on their website. So here's what makes Apollo clinically interesting and clinically complicated at the same time. Apollo is designed to be passive. You don't breathe differently while using it. You don't direct your attention. You don't really practice anything. You just put it on and let it do its thing. And for some people, in some situations, that's exactly right. And there's a clinical tension there that I think the product team hasn't fully grappled with. One of the most important therapeutic outcomes of any regulation work, beyond the immediate state shift, is what the client learns about themselves. I can do this. My body can settle. I have some access to that. That felt sense of capacity is itself part of the treatment. It's what we're building toward. A device that regulates you doesn't build that. It may even quietly undermine it, creating a dependence on an external tool rather than deepening trust in the body's own resources. That's not a reason not to use Apollo. It's just a reason to be thoughtful about when and with whom. And to be fair, there are absolutely clients for whom passive support is the right starting point. Clients in acute crisis, in the very early stages of some trauma work, with sensory processing differences that make interoceptive focus activating rather than settling. For those clients, something that works without requiring their active participation may genuinely be useful, a bridge, but not an endpoint. The clinical question is always, is this tool building capacity or replacing it? So again, our verdict against the 3 criteria we've been talking about: safety signal. It's very strong. Vibrotactile touch is a direct biological neuroception cue. This is the most biologically grounded mechanism of the 3 devices. In terms of rhythmic time, yes, embedded in the device's patterns. And then in terms of active participation, it's low by design. Agency building, limited. And that limitation needs to be clinically managed. So what is this best for? acute high activation states, early stage trauma work, sensory processing differences, or as an adjunct to active practice rather than a replacement for it. So the next device we're going to talk about is called HeartMath Inner Balance. And it's different from the other two devices in a way that matters clinically. It's not reading your brain. It's not vibrating at you. It's measuring your heart rhythm, specifically your heart rate variability, and showing it to you in a real time through an app. The sensor clips to your earlobe or finger, read your pulse, and the app displays your HRV as a wave form. When you're in what HeartMath calls coherence, that smooth sine wave like HRV pattern associated with parasympathetic dominance, the display reflects that. When you're not, you can see that as well. But here's what makes HeartMath different from basic HRV trackers like Garmin or Apple Watches. The practice it teaches requires two things simultaneously: slow-paced breathing and a deliberate shift in the emotional quality of your inner state. Not just slowing down, actively moving toward appreciation, care, or neutral ease. The research behind why that emotional component matters is one of the most interesting threads in this space. 2025 peer review in Sage Journals summarizes independent RCT evidence for HeartMath HRV coherence training, significant improvements in anxiety, depression, PTSD, sleep, and stress, including in randomized waitlist controlled trials with cancer survivors and chronic pain patients and veterans. Over 500 independent research papers published on heart coherence and its associated outcomes. This is the strongest evidence base of the three devices and a meaningful portion of the independent, not commissioned by HeartMath itself. The VA Whole Health Program has embedded HeartMath into their electrical medical record as an intervention indicated for over 25 diagnoses. That's institutional adoption at a level that matters. HeartMath is used in VA medical centers for PTSD, traumatic brain injury, chronic pain, depression, anxiety, and addiction, embedded in the clinical workflow, not just offered as a supplementary app. Now, there's a caveat, because there always is one. A significant portion of HeartMath's research comes from or through HeartMath Institute itself. The coherence model, the idea that the heart communicates with the brain in a way that influences cognition and emotion, involves claims that go beyond what mainstream autonomic science currently fully supports. Some of the language on their website ventures into territory that I'd hold with more skepticism than the core HRV research warrants. My position: the technology works. The HRV coherence training produces real, measurable physiological effects that are well documented. The broader theoretical framework, hold lightly. Use the tool, understand the mechanism. You don't need the full philosophical package to benefit from it. Here's what I find compelling about HeartMath from a clinical standpoint. It requires active engagement, not passive, active. You have to breathe deliberately and generate a specific quality of inner state. That's not easy. It's a skill. And the device gives you a real-time feedback on whether you're actually doing it. Mirrors exactly what Monday's practice was training for. The coherence breathing we did, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, is the same mechanism. HeartMath shows you in real time whether you're accessing the same biological state we were targeting without the device. It's a feedback tool for a skill you're already building, not a replacement for the skill itself. So in clinical terms, HeartMath is the device most likely to build a client's sense of their own capacity over time rather than replacing it. So again, let's look at the verdict against our three criteria. Safety signal, yes, strong. Rhythmic time, yes, and individually calibrated to your actual physiology. And then as far as active participation, high by design. Agency building, high. This is the device most clinically aligned with the goal of nervous system regulation as a learnable skill. So what is it best fit for? Clients ready to actively build regulation capacity, anxiety and depression with autonomic component, practitioners themselves. This is the one I would genuinely recommend for clinician wellness. So let me give you a framework for thinking about which of these devices, if any, might be worth trying and for whom. The simplest version is a two-axis question. First axis, does the person need passive support or active engagement? Some clients are in a state where doing anything feels like too much. They need something that works without requiring their active participation. That's Apollo's lane. Other clients are ready to build a skill. They want to understand what's happening in their body and develop their own access to regulation. That's HeartMath's lane. Muse sits somewhere in the middle. It can support practice, but it requires some motivation and self-awareness to use well. Second axis is interoceptive focus, settling or activating for this person. For most people, directing attention to body sensations during regulation practice is grounding. For clients with trauma histories where the body itself carries danger, where turning attention inward means turning toward threat, it's not. For these clients, any device that increases interoceptive focus needs to be introduced slowly and carefully, with explicit attention to pacing and window of tolerance. Here's what none of these products have addressed adequately, though. And I say this as someone who thinks that technology is genuinely promising and moving at a rapid rate. None of them have built contraindications into their onboarding. None of them ask, for instance, do you have a trauma history? Do you experience dissociation? Does focusing on your body tend to feel activating rather than settling? Do you have health anxiety that might make monitoring your biometrics a new source of distress? These are clinical questions, and the absence of them in consumer products isn't a design failure. It's just a clinical gap, a gap that a clinical advisor would close. So what are some of the contraindications worth noting? Again, trauma histories where interoceptive focus is activating, introducing any body-facing device slowly with explicit consent and clinical pacing is the way to go. Health anxiety or somatic preoccupation is another area where biometric feedback can amplify vigilance rather than reduce it. And then in dissociative presentations, grounding and present moment contact should precede any interoceptive device introduction. Clients who externalize locus of control, passive device risk in reinforcing the belief that regulation requires outside help. So that you might there consider active engagement devices or no devices at all until that shifts. So here's where I land on all of them. These devices are not replacing the practice we did on Monday. The best ones are actually amplifying it, giving you a feedback signal that helps you find and recognize the state you're trying to access. HeartMath does that most effectively, in my view, because it requires active participation with the same mechanism the practice was building. Muse can support meditation practice, but it needs to be used with some clinical awareness, particularly the risk of rewarding the wrong kind of effort. And then Apollo has a meaningful biological mechanism and the most intriguing research pipeline. But the passive design means it's better as an adjunct rather than a primary tool for most people. And then what none of them replace, and I want to be clear about this, is the relationship with your own body. The Monday practice was about your nervous system learning to recognize and access its own regulated state. That recognition, that felt sense, that growing trust in your body's capacity, no device produces that directly. At best, a device reflects it back to you. The work still happens in the body. Higher vagal tone built through practices like coherence breathing predicts better self-regulation, social engagement, and physiological recovery from stress. It is a training capacity, not a fixed trait, meaning anyone can make improvements here. The goal of any device in this space should be to support that training, not to substitute for it. If you did try Monday's practice and you're curious about any of these devices and what they would add, I'd encourage you to try it. Do Monday's practice again first. Notice that state and how it feels and in line with your own feedback. Then if you want, add a device and see what changes. Not to find the right tool, to get curious about what feedback adds and what it takes away from your experience of your own nervous system. That curiosity, that direct relationship with your own body's signals is the thing worth building. Everything else is a compass. You're the one who has to do the walking. I'm really glad that you joined me today to talk about and discuss and review and be curious about what additive component these devices can bring to your practice. My name is Dominic Adori, and this has been Metatherapy Tech Tuesday. I'll see you again on Thursday. And if this is the first time you're here and you want the baseline practice we've been referencing all episode, it's linked in the description. Start there. It's worth it. I'll see you next time.